First of all, your personas are key. I mentioned before, like, B2B marketing, we tend to too often, we think of B2B as, selling into buildings. Well, who are the people within those organizations that you're actively trying to sell to? Think of this in terms of members of the buying committee as well. Who are the people that have different roles? Who are the decision makers? Who are the influencers? Who are the users? And with personas, I'm less worried about the demographics of who they are. I'm more interested in their their objectives and their objections and their obstacles. What are the things they're trying to get done? How well do you understand what their objectives are, and how well do you understand what obstacles are in their way? The better you understand their personas, the more you can get away from the rote questions of, what keeps you up at night. None of us like that question. It can go any number of different ways. What if you were to tell your prospects what should be keeping them up at night? For instance, conversational marketing, here's a channel for you. What about your sales team? What kind of conversation are they having with their prospects? If the very first conversation with your sales team, with a prospect, what if I told you you weren't allowed to talk about your product or service in that call? What conversation would you have? Well, how about something like this? Hey, Mr. Prospect, thanks for downloading the white paper. Have you had a chance to read it? Of course you haven't, because no one reads white papers, but I have a different question for you. Why did you download that? What's going on in your business right now that made that topic interesting? Like, what's going on this week that made you interested to respond? Why in God's name would you put your name on our spam list in exchange for a PDF? Let's talk about that. And if you're writing your content and producing content that ties to the things that should be keeping your prospects up at night, then you've got a conversation to have. And say, hey, listen, I get to talk to people in your role all day long, and when I ask them what keeps them up at night, they tell me the same three things. Which of those three just made you a little sweaty just thinking about it? Or is there something on that list you haven't been thinking about? But now that you know that most of your peers are thinking about that, how does that change the way you think about this? How does that change the way you think about addressing that? So the persona has to do with those things that should be keeping them up at night. And so I think you then think about not only how does that prospect buy, what are their concerns, but then what are the questions they have? What are the questions they should have? What are the ways they should be challenging their own status quo? And what I love about this approach is it's not just about information you present to your prospect. This is not just information that you give to them and hope they respond. Questions incite responses. Questions create conversation. And so when you ask your prospects, are you worried about X? If they're not and you believe they should be, that's an interesting conversation to have that provides value to that prospect that helps them get better. Now, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but I think, if you think through the different stages of the buying journey, you think about different stages of that buying progression, it allows you to not only think about the mindset of the prospect in that stage, but that you can then start thinking about, okay, what are the things they're looking at? What are the things they should be doing? What's the evidence I might be able to observe in the field of what they're working on to place them on this continuum, and then figure out what's the next step? What's the catalyst I can put in front of them to engage in the next step? What's the type of content? What's the format of that content and that conversation that's going to help them be smarter? And again, this is a place where if we take snapshots, we'll be able to give you all a copy of this presentation. If it is a spreadsheet, it looks like a spreadsheet in this case, it certainly is a spreadsheet. So happy to share that with you. I mentioned before the idea of this buying committee. I think it's really important to understand the members of that buying committee. There's in enterprise marketing or enterprise purchases today, there's at least 5 or 6 members typically on average in that buying committee. You've got a decision maker, maybe an executive sponsor. You've got influencers. Some may be positive, some may be negative. The procurement department, the sales prevention department may very well be part of the buying committee. But if you don't address that and understand their role up front and address concerns you think they're going to have, it may slow down and or kill your deal. So knowing who those members are and understanding the connective tissue between them, where do they have things in common, where do they agree and disagree, is an interesting way of building consensus and velocity amongst them to move towards the outcome that you care about. All right, so some tactical, some strategic. So let's bring this home and talk a little bit about how this applies inside your organization today. I would encourage you to take a lot of your content today and do a little bit of a map. Figure out across members of the buying committee as well as stages of the buying journey, plot the content that you have to see where you are strong and where you might be weak. We find most often that content is not mapped to specific members of the buying committee. And so you'll have content that is written for everybody and therefore really doesn't address any member of the buying committee's specific needs. We also often see that content exists very heavily at the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel, but not necessarily in the middle. Sometimes that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes companies will say, well, we have a ton of great content, and it's all educational content. But if you look at it objectively, you realize it's really kind of pitchy, and therefore it's more justified the decision content than it is challenging the status quo content. But I encourage you to take a look at, where you are today, where you're weak, where you're strong, where the opportunities are to create more precise, more actionable content to get your prospects to moving forward. And as you think about then stages of the buying process and you think about the mindset of that customer, think about the content that needs to exist in each of those stages. If you've got a prospect that is actively engaged in your buying process, you can probably put conversational content in front of them that drives more immersion, that takes more time. Not every conversation is the same length. So if you're at the beginning of the buying process, the formats you put together had better be short. The emails had better be extremely short. They're not going to listen to a 60-minute podcast. But some of the companies in the MarTech space that do the best at converting leads off their website have a call to action to something like, watch this 4-minute video. It's a 4-minute video about something that is not a demo, it's about a value add, but 4 minutes scientifically is something that we were willing to sign up for. You may still not watch the whole thing, but I've literally seen the data that shows 4 minutes versus 5 minutes, significant difference in terms of whether someone's willing to look at it and spend time on it. That's why we price things at $9.99 instead of $10. There's a psychological difference in the way we think about that. So I'd encourage you to do a little bit of content mapping on where you are today and then where the stages are you need to address moving forward. What's missing? What would you like to have? And then what do you need to create moving forward? Talk about benchmarking your state, not only in terms of the content you create, but also how and where you're promoting it. Think about where your prospects are. Where can you have conversations? How often are you posting content that is that goes unresponded, that doesn't create a conversation? Every piece of content you have should encourage a next step. It should encourage some question. Have a question at the end of every blog post. Have Q&As at the end of every webinar. Encourage your prospects to continue that conversation, to give them opportunities to talk to you, not to just talk at them. The formats you create, we talked a little bit about the different variety of formats, and I think it's important to be really strategic at what formats you create for different stages of the buying journey. The earlier the stage, the less attention you're going to get. The more senior the individual in the organization, the less attention you're going to get. If you create a great white paper with lots of great insights and lots of great detail for people that are more junior in the organization, take out all the copy and just keep the headlines, and keep the graphics, and keep the captions, and maybe that's a flip book for the C-level to give them the gist of it. So places where you can sort of repurpose different types of content. And then the other thing I'd encourage you to do is if your sales team already has a set of lead and opportunity definitions, make sure you have a real crisp definition of what that means between the organizations. But each one of those stages, what are the topics of conversation you want to have with each person, and what are the formats and tools you're going to use to engage in that conversation? If you've got an early stage prospect that's just looking at your content, maybe no matter what the topic is, maybe the format is a chat feature on your website. Right? If you're in the middle of the buying process, maybe you're a justify the decision process. Maybe it's a customer live webinar. We had a lot of success with this with a couple clients where we had stalled opportunities, and we were creating webinars for an audience literally of 8 to 10 people. We weren't worried about volume. We wanted stalled deals to show up and hear from other customers. And it was, I think we called it like customers raw. And it was customers talking about the onboarding process, what they wish they knew at the beginning. It was an opportunity for prospective customers to talk to, recently new customers. And without fail, every time we did one of those, we got prospects that were stalled say, okay, that alleviated my concerns, I'm ready to move forward. So in that case, I would not promote the customer Q&A to my entire database, nor would I worry that only 5 or 6 people showed up, because it was the right content for those 5 or 6 people. And if that got 2 or 3 deals unstuck to move forward, you think about the math and the influence that you could have on that marketing activity is pretty high. So some mistakes we see people make as they're on this plan. I think, there's a lot of stuff you could just shoot from the hip on, but if you don't have some of these fundamental planning elements figured out up front, if you don't understand why you're doing some of this, it can actually impede your ability to create more efficient more scalable, more impactful content. I think way too often we're writing about ourselves instead of the customer. Go back through your content, through your email templates, and look at how many times you say I and we versus you. And then go and watch some videos of Apple keynotes. Go watch Tim Cook, go watch Steve Jobs when they're on stage, and how often they use the word you. It is captivating. It gets you to stop and lean in. You is how you get conversations going. I think a lot of us are, I think this is starting to change, but producing way too much written content. As you're creating more interactive content, more visual content, more multimedia content, not only does it become something you can repurpose into multiple more formats, but multimedia, whether it's visuals, it's audio, it's some of the written word as well. You've got people that learn in different ways, but pulling all that together gets people to pay attention and continue and stay paying attention. Again, this is a bit of an eye-chart spreadsheet, but as you create this content, don't just release it as a wild and assume it's all going to work. If you're not working with your demand gen team to integrate this content in, you're missing a huge opportunity. If you've done all this work to map your content to the buying cycle, to the buying journey, this should have a direct impact on the demand gen team. And conversational marketing does not always end with a form fill. If you can get someone engaged with more of your content and create a more natural inclination from that customer to engage with you, to ask more questions, to inquire about how you solve that problem, you have a more qualified and a more interested and a more committed prospect along the way. So as you integrate demand gen sales with this effort, I think make sure you understand the ends, make sure you understand what's working, make sure you've got systems and processes in place to not only publish and share this content, but also create a feedback loop to understand what's working and what's not working. Now, usually at this point, we start talking about content in front of the sales team. We create a lot of content the sales team doesn't use. I've heard up to 90% of content created for sales doesn't get used. And unfortunately, the response from most marketers to that problem is, well, let's go and create less content. Let's just create only 10% of the content. The answer is, unfortunately, the opposite of that. You need to create more content for your sales team. And when I say content, it doesn't have to be, like every piece of content doesn't have to be a white paper or some big produced tool. It could be a quote. It could be an infographic. It could be a statistic. Something simple that's the right message for the right person at the right portion of the part of the sales process that gets their attention, that answers that particular question, and gets them to move on. Every sales rep I know that's worth their weight in salt focuses their efforts on one thing and one thing only. They're focused on how do I get the most prospects, what do I do with my time to get people to engage, that's actually going to help me make money. And if your content they don't believe is going to help you to make money, then they'll move on to something else. All right, let's talk a little bit about execution, and then I know we got time for some Q&A. Now we've got a lot of stuff coming up here as well. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. Hold on. From a creative brief standpoint, highly encourage you to write creative briefs for the content you're creating, not just based on what you want the content to say, but what you want that content to do. And yes, creative briefs take more time, but what I like about creative briefs is it ensures that everyone's on the same page with not just the what, but with the why. What do we need this content to do? What do we expect it to achieve? Super important to make sure you've got some of those pieces in place. So feel free to obviously take this creative brief and use this for yourself as well. You can use pieces of this if you want, but the more of this you put together, the less discussion, the less I thought it was going to be X later on you're going to have, the more successful you're going to be. From an editorial calendar standpoint, this is a pretty simple tool, but what I like about it is it makes it specific, not just what we're publishing, but who we're publishing it for, whether it's on the blog or your podcast or other tools. So it's a fairly simple process. I know there's a lot more complicated tools out there, but I think the main point here is as you're promoting content across an editorial calendar, tie it back to the audience and the intent of that content. For your blog, for the assets you're creating, another just different tool you can use to get that across. When you're measuring all of this, make sure you're separating your operational dashboard from your executive dashboard. There's on one side, on the operational side, there's improving how marketing works. Are we getting as many eyeballs as we can or should? Is it actually having the impact we want it to have? But getting eyeballs, getting clicks, getting likes is different from getting the impact of marketing. Now, I can't buy a beer with clicks and likes. So what am I doing to measure the impact content is having? Is it creating velocity and movement of that prospect through the pipeline? If you think about sort of the revenue impact of your marketing and your content, you'll be in a better place. All right. that was a lot of content in a short amount of time. So I realized we went through a lot of stuff there. If you take everything we just talked about and you take that to your next, you take that out in the field, try to do it all at once, it'll be like a golf lesson where you get 30 minutes of golf training and then give you like 45 things you should be doing with your swing. I would highly encourage you to pick a few things you heard today, start with those, take the rest of them and start to incorporate the right things ongoing. This is a journey, not a destination. And remember, the deck, the spreadsheet you see, the longer version, the workbook of this, and most importantly, all of that really good, delicious bacon. Make sure you take advantage of that. Thank you so much for having me today, and I know, Stephanie, I think we maybe have a few questions here as well.
Yes, we do. First of all, I'm really hungry because of all this bacon, so I'm just going to cut to the chase. Do you prefer dry brine or wet brine for bacon? What's the secret?
So, yeah, I'm a big dry brine guy for a couple reasons. I actually think you have better control of the salt content of the bacon. I think with wet brine, sometimes it gets just a little too intense. Now, if you're doing like a maple brine, or if you're doing like a soy brine, like I've got a really good like Asian bacon recipe that's not really a breakfast bacon, but it's a really, really tasty, sort of afternoon appetizer. Wet brine kind of is required because you're dealing with wet ingredients. But my favorite bacon, which we consider our house bacon, is just salt, pepper, little brown sugar, little pink salt for the nitrite, just dry brine. It works great.
Oh my God, that sounds so good. Okay, let's get to the business stuff. There is a great question here from Judy. Would you have this conversation, the conversation she's referring to, like what should keep people up at night over the marketing journey? Would you have that as a face-to-face conversation, or where would you have that conversation? What format?
Well, I think you could have it in a variety of ways. I think, face-to-face is certainly valuable, but you may not have the ability to do that. It may be that, you can't get in front of someone, but doing that in the video format versus just slides can be valuable. It's interesting when you think about like webinars. I think, I think about, webinars like this where, you're not seeing me, you're hearing me, but you're seeing slides. We've done quite a few with On24, for example, where there's slides, but then there's also videos. You're seeing me as well. I would have been happy to do that today. I'm in a hotel room in the middle of the Bay Area, so it's not exactly fancy right here. But, I think seeing people and seeing their excitement certainly adds to the experience. So we don't always have access to all those senses in our presentations, but I think when you think about some of the best conversations you have, text isn't nearly as good as phone. Phone isn't nearly good as video. Video isn't not nearly as good as being there face-to-face. So I think that the outcome to that for me is just take advantage of as many of the senses as you can to have the biggest impact.
Fabulous. Okay. Well, we'll do video next time. I'm putting that down as a note. Next time we're doing video. So, okay, another question here. Are there conversational formats you can think of that get multiple members of the buying committee to participate and engage together? That's a good question.
It is a good question. I actually think, doing kind of a working session can be good for that. If you can say, hey, listen, like instead of just educating you on here's how better sales and marketing alignment works, what if I came in and said, hey, listen, let's take a half hour and I want to walk you through just a very quick working session to give you guys some concepts together to think about. And if we do that right, then you're going to end up, having some topics that you maybe hadn't thought about. And we're not going to solve a lot in 30 minutes. But after 30 minutes, and you all sit and look at that together, you look at each other, you're like, well, I thought you thought this, and I thought your intentions were that. At the end of that, you can be, okay, now you've got some things to work on, and I'm happy to help facilitate that as sort of as a seller. But treating it like a working session where they're going to get value out of that process can help significantly.
Right. All right. This is really interesting because we've got, at least in the U.S., we have some holidays coming up. What do you think about doing online events during the holidays? Is that a bad idea?
It depends on what you're trying to get done. I guess, if you're trying to close deals in the last couple of months or a couple of weeks of the year, during the Christmas, Hanukkah holidays, if you're selling into a complex buying committee, it's likely someone's going to be out. That may not be able to sort of make the final decision. I think that's why a lot of companies have moved their fiscal year from calendar purely to February to January. But there's an awful lot of people that are still around. And we've got a couple clients who are really pushing them to do some online events and some in-person events Monday and Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And you could be like, oh my gosh, it's Thanksgiving week, what are you doing? It's like, well, yeah, no matter when, like, someone's going to be gone. No matter when you do something, someone's traveling, they're on vacation, they're out sick, like, that's ever going to happen every single day. But the nice thing about the holidays, the nice thing about the Friday that happens to be July 5th that some people are working, or even the first couple days of Thanksgiving week, meetings get canceled. Their schedules are lighter. They're more likely to engage in a conversation with you. There's many, many times when people say, yes, I'd love to talk to you, I just don't have time. My calendar is full. Take advantage of some of those slow times to have the conversations you want that can hopefully move the conversation forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've sort of wrestled with here at CMI as well. You know, what should we or should we not do around the holidays? Even weekends, you know, when we, and I don't mean online events, but I mean even sending out newsletters on weekends. Are we invading personal time? But I totally agree with you on the holiday thing because, we have Content Marketing World each September around Labor Day. So we have to kind of make a decision, you know, is that okay? You know, are people going to be able to come? You know, and that's an in-person event that requires travel. So at least with online events, even if they're busy, if they're traveling during that particular holiday, you've got an on-demand version of something that they can enjoy, you know, on their own time, really. So
yeah,
okay,
yeah, and I think, you know, I do get a little tired of, like, I'm tired is probably the wrong word. I think there's always an excuse not to do something. You know, it's like, well, it's August, and so people are on vacation. Well, you know, it's December, so people are busy doing holiday stuff. Like, you know what? Like, there's, you know, for instance, we're doing a breakfast with CMOs tomorrow in Phoenix, and like I had, like, for every one person that said yes to come, there were 3 that said I wish I could, but I can't. So should we not do it because, quote unquote, not everyone can attend? Like, that's always going to be a problem. I also think the anecdote to that, and you guys have done a phenomenal job on this with Content Marketing World, is it's the same week. There's some expectation that it's going to be the week after Labor Day, but I know there's some consistency in terms of how I plan my day and how I plan my travel. But you do that enough, like, you've driven by the house and thrown stuff in the mailbox for years, and people know that Content Marketing World is worth their time, right? And so when they know they're going to get something of value, that becomes their prioritization. It's not that they're necessarily going to give up their holidays, but they might say, I'm willing to, at the end of that long weekend, instead of, like, digging back into my inbox, I'm going to get on a plane and go to something that's going to create value.
Yeah, that's a great point. Really good point. Okay, here's another great question. What's the industry standard for registration to attendance conversion rates on webinars these days?
Oh, boy. So I think the rule of thumb 10 years ago was kind of like 50%, right? Like, you assume, like, okay, if I get 100 people signed up for my webinar, maybe 50, maybe 55 are going to show up. I'd say it's about half that now, 25 to 30% maybe. But here's why I don't care. Because I think if you the same rationale for the white paper. If you downloaded the white paper but didn't read it, does that change your qualification in terms of being interested in the problem? Like, if you signed up for an hour long listening to some windbag talk about conversational marketing, and all of a sudden you got pulled into a fire drill, or your kid was sick and you couldn't do it, or you just, like, you had something else you had to go do, or you forgot, or whatever. Does that inherently change your interest in conversational marketing? No, it does not. So I think getting people to a live event is still worthwhile, still valuable. You know, you have an ability to ask questions like that, like, you know, if you watch this later, I'm not going to be sitting there when you're watching it on demand at 2 in the morning, so I can't ask your question right then. But the ability to then use this on demand, the ability to now take this and break it up into segments, the ability to take the transcript and turn that into written content is significant. So most companies look at events like this, whether it's a webinar, you know, white paper download, and see that as the beginning of a journey where someone has indicated interest in a topic that is prescient. And that's where I think it gets interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I had a great conversation with Mark Bornstein from On24 just a couple of weeks ago about this very topic, about reminding people not to, forget the significance of what the on-demand version can do for you. I mean, we're all busy, you know, sometimes it just doesn't work, but, you know, you registered and you want to get that link in your inbox and watch it whenever. But also, to take your webinars and think about other content that can come from them. It's an extremely valuable way to address it. In fact, there's some, I've been kind of looking at the chatter on Twitter as your presentation's been going on, and I think there are some people who are excited to get that on-demand link because it was a lot of information to take in during the live event, right? I mean, it was fast-paced, lots of stuff. So I'll remind people that you will get that link in about 24 hours to the on-demand version, and you can rewatch it yourself. You can share it, and get a second chance for taking it in if you weren't fully paying attention on a certain slide, and then you realize, wait, I need to know about that. So, okay.
Well, I think that's another benefit of these kind of formats, right? Is that you know it's going to be available afterward, and even I know I have a propensity to get a little excited and talk quickly, but I most of the time, if I'm at a good session somewhere, if I'm at a keynote or if I'm in a workshop, you get to the point where you get so much good information, my strategy becomes, I'm just going to write it all down and grok it later. I want to capture as much of this as I can and then dedicate time to going back through this to figure out what I thought. And, even though we're going to end here in a few minutes, I think, we got my contact information somewhere. If you have a subsequent question afterward, you can still usually find someone who is prioritizing that conversational element so that it doesn't end at, a presentation like this. You can continue the conversation ongoing as long as it's needed.
Yeah. Excellent. I got a DM from someone on Twitter who said, can you ask Matt to elaborate a little bit more on what he said with be memorable, not agreeable?
Yeah. I think, when you can introduce an insight that isn't necessarily popular but is necessary, that makes you memorable. Like, if you want to be agreeable, then what you need to do is you need to only present things that the customer believes today. You need to only present things that the customer agrees to today. And a lot of us that we have our status quo, we don't want to change. Like, I don't want to change my technology provider. I don't want to change my phone system. I don't want to, God help me, we've been in the same office space for 6 years and we've got a great landlord, but God help me, I don't ever want to move our office, right? But if you all of a sudden make a case that we could be more productive somewhere else or save 50% on our rent somewhere else and get the same services, if you introduce insights that make me think differently, you are not agreeable, because what I want you to say to be agreeable is I don't want to have to go through the cost and hassle of moving. But if you paint a better big picture of a future, if you paint a better picture of an outcome that's worth making change, that makes you memorable because you introduce that too.
Excellent. I think one of my favorite things from this presentation, and I've been taking my own notes too, when you talked about customers or your prospects and they're busy, they're skeptical. My favorite part is they're a lot like you, and how do you want to be marketed to? I think that's something we should all put on our bulletin boards, and try to remind yourself of this. They're just like us. What bothers us? What do we love? What approaches do we appreciate? And so, really great advice. All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate the time, the guidance. Thank you to On24 for sponsoring today. This has been a really great discussion. Just another reminder, folks, you will get that link within the next day or so. Feel free to share it with anybody that you'd like. And if you got additional questions,